Just one introduction. Elixir 1.13 release candidate is out. So you can check out the changelog. There are a bunch of in the 1.13 branch, because the main branch has already shifted. But there are a bunch of exciting improvements, and the biggest improvement is what we are calling semantic recompilations. Now we try to understand more which file we are changing and how it impacts the code base. So we recompile less files in a number of situations. And that's new, and I would love if people could try out and give us feedback. If you at any point you have to say, oh, things are borked, I need to remove the underscore build directory, it's because we messed up. So I would really appreciate a bug report. But yeah, try the release candidate, and we would love to hear your thoughts.
Okay, there are already 3 questions in the Q&A. Adolfo, would you like to give your question live?
Yes. So this question, I'm the one bringing it here, but it seems to be around the community. What do you say to people that want to have maybe optional static typing or gradual typing in Elixir? Because I have seen your talk at Elixir Conf. I see there are no plans for that, but what do you say to those people?
So I think, yeah, first, hi, Adolfo. I think this is something that so there is a lot to explore, and that's one of the challenges with typing. And it's like, well, if you're going to add something to Elixir, which flavor we are going to have, right? Like, so that's why, like, all those, I'm really excited about things like caramel, gleam. There is the one, I think it's Haskell, which is the mixture of, like, I'm really excited about those things because I want to see how they are typing things like behaviors and see all the different approaches. So I think we should continue looking into it and see what we learn, like, and maybe, I don't know when, there's no time frame, right? And maybe one day things are going to click, or maybe they'll never click. But it's something that I don't say like we're never going to have that, but when we are confident that, hey, like, this is the way to go, I think we should definitely explore that more intensively. The other thing is that I also think there's like a lot that we can improve even on what we have today. So I like to say that a lot of times Elixir code, Erlang code is very assertive because of pattern matching, because of guards. You usually know the type of the things that you have, and the compiler maybe could be using that information to provide better error messages and catching more obvious things early on. So we have already did improvements over time with this. So for example, before Elixir, if you try to access a field in a struct that did not exist dynamically, you would only get an error at runtime. Now we say those things at compile time. So we have been improving things, like trying to use the fact that the code is assertive, which brings us in the direction. It is type checking, right? It's just a very limited form of type checking. The user cannot interact with it in any way. But yeah, I think it's an exciting area, but I don't think there is a obvious clear path. And until we have that, I think it's hard for us to make a concrete step. But it's something that we are always very interested in improving things whenever we can.
Okay, thank you.
Adolfo, you can go. You have 2 more questions. You can go ahead and ask if you like.
Okay, so this, I don't know the order here, but yes, is the Elixir Core Team responsible, even if indirectly, for advances in Erlang OTP? If so, which are the new things in Erlang OTP that are there maybe because of Elixir?
Okay, okay, this is a tricky question. So I have definitely done a good amount of contributions to Erlang OTP. I'm probably above like 100 per request or something like that. So whenever there is like, for example, oh, if I can make something faster, usually my first question is, hey, is there an interest should this contribution be happening to Erlang? So so for example, I've done some um, I've contributed to the compiler, adding new passes, so like the code that it emits is more efficient. I've contributed to sometimes um, somebody shares a piece of Elixir code that is slow to compile, and then I send a pull request to make that faster, and that improvement is going to benefit everybody, right? Because it's usually happening in the part of the compilation stack that is shared by everybody, and that makes the compiler faster. So yeah, I think there are definitely like some very direct contributions, because we went and we submitted pull request, and it's never like specific to Elixir, right? It's sometimes we do add a thing like, hey, um, this is like um, this is like this will be beneficial for Elixir, but I think all the features, they need to stand on their own. They need to be good for Erlang developers, even if the original rationale was like, this is for Elixir. Yeah, and then there are some pull requests that yeah, and then as code, there's definitely some pull requests that I sent that I like more than others. So there are some contributions that I'm very proud of. There are like some one of the, I think the hardest contribution I made to Erlang OTP was optimizing binary matching to using the instructions, and it was really cool because in some cases, if you had a large string and you're looking for the pattern and the pattern is never there, in some case it was like 80 times faster. So that was really cool. So yeah, and I think we also did like some indirect contributions. So for example, when the OTP team was working on the new logger, they reached out to us for feedback, as they reached out to the logger team at the time. And then I did, sometimes I would write a EP, a Erlang enhancement proposal that they would accept, and then they would implement. Which is really nice. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of like cross pollination, and sometimes like a Bjorn from the compiler team, he runs, they have like some scripts to benchmark Elixir as well, to see if the changes they are doing is not affecting Elixir, and then we get pull requests from them. So there's definitely a lot of cross pollination of ideas and contributions.
Thanks again.
Okay, I believe the next question is from Rohinton. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, or?
Yeah, I can do that. So yeah, Jose, hi, how are you doing?
Doing great, thank you.
Cool. So I'm just curious to know, now that Erlang, Beam is going to have a VM, how will Elixir make use of it, and what positives will it add for Elixir?
Sorry, I think I'm missing some background. What is going to have a VM?
Beam.
Right. So there is the Beam VM that Erlang and Elixir, they all run on. So regarding like environments, whatever environment that runs Erlang is going to run Elixir as well, with very little additional effort, because the way that, and this was a design decision back then, we wanted really to be compatible with Erlang. So the way that, so for example, if you get Erlang code, the Erlang code is parsed, becomes Erlang AST, and then compiled. And Elixir code is parsed, it becomes Elixir AST, then it becomes Erlang AST, and it's compiled. So like they really share a lot. So so anything that is like, hey, this works with Erlang, it's most likely just going to work with Elixir. And also it's also good because, for example, there is like the Lumen project, which is an implementation of the Erlang VM and of the runtime and everything in Rust, they are really targeting Erlang because that's what makes sense. So it's an effort that came from within Elixir, but also works from Erlang because they have this common path. So yeah, did I answer your question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, great. The next question is from Manuel.
Hi, hello, how are you? Thanks for everything on Elixir and for this great idea of creating this language. I want to ask you a question that is always on my mind. Are we encouraged as Elixir developers to communicate our services or Elixir services, microservices, or Elixir or Beam-based services using distributed Erlang instead of things like HTTP or other ways of doing this? Are we encouraged to do this?
Yeah, so maybe people are going to disagree. My opinion, okay, is the Erlang distribution is for running homogeneous services. So it is for running, it's for communicating between nodes where all the nodes, they are running the same code. For me, that's where it excels, because let's say that you have service A and then you have service B, okay? And they are running distinct code. And imagine that you want to use the Erlang distribution to communicate. The thing with that is that, well, now imagine that you do a new deploy and they are like 2 versions of service B. Like now you need to implement like load balancing, and then you need to handle like blue and green deployment. So you have to create all this infrastructure that is already going to come with other protocols or with existing infrastructure. So my opinion, so that's my take. Like I would use the Erlang distribution for, like like you have a bunch of, so one example that I like to give is like Phoenix with the pub sub. They're all running the same node, the same code, sorry, they're all running the same code, and you want to communicate events between them, or you want to use presence to see who is connected. But I wouldn't use as the communication of different services. I would pick something that it's more, there's already a bunch of infrastructure, tooling, proxying, load balancing, whatever you would need.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. I think our next question is from Yves.
Yes.
Are you on?
Hi. Thank you. Yes, designing a language is making a lot of choices, and sometimes they can be wrong. So what are your main regrets? And I'm also wondering in general if you are documenting that somewhere.
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to say, like, every time, because so like the thing about designing a language, I use this metaphor that it's kind of like a Jenga game, in the sense like if you take something out, even if it's small, it just affects like so many things, and so many things changes. So for example, like imagine that Elixir, like the fact that Elixir has optional parentheses, for example, it adds some conveniences in other places, but it, like, for example, syntactically forbid other things to happen. So whenever I think, well, what if parentheses were not optional? Not that I regret it, I'm just using it as an example, right? The changes, they cascade so much that at the end, you would have a language that would actually be reasonably different from what Elixir is today. So for this reason, like every time I think about something more fundamental, like, hey, what if this was different? It just sent me to a very like long rabbit hole trip, because it always, it always cascades to a bunch of changes. So to answer the question more directly after the background is I most likely have regrets, but it's always, I don't have anything on top of my mind. It's not documented, but it's not like I don't have an answer of how it could be better. You see what I mean? It's not like, it's like just because some of those things is like, even if you have a small regret, like changing that regret could affect so many things that it's really hard to assess if the thing after it is going to be better, because those changes, they usually cascade. And the other thing is that I think because of Elixir design, the way it is meant to kind of like be small and a lot of Elixir being written in itself, it gives us plenty of flexibility to, if there is a regret, if I had regrets in the past, I actually fixed a lot of them, because we have this flexibility of saying, hey, you know, I want to change how this works. And, you know, in order to add like new constructs to the language, we don't have to do like major surgery in the language and change things. So we have a lot of flexibility. Well, if something is wrong, let's deprecate what is the old way, the way that we don't like, and introduce a new one. And actually, so, and for this thing in particular, we do have a list. So if you go to the Elixir documentation, we have the page section, and that lists, and there is a page called compatibility and deprecations. And we have a list of everything that we deprecated. And in a way, that's a regret. That's something that we probably got wrong, but we're able to address it and introduce a new way that we believe is better. So yeah, so, you know, if you want a practical thing, like, hey, those were regrets or mistakes, check out the deprecations, because some of those, they will really be like, yeah, we should not have done that.
Thanks.
Thanks, Yves. So our next question is from Frank McGill. Do you want to take the lead?
Yeah. Hey, Jose. Thanks, first of all, for all you've done. And it's been fun since I've been involved with Elixir, because I used to be deep in the Java world, and this is a lot more fun. But my question is, and I'm running into this more often now because I'm dealing with authorizations, things that are very time sensitive, is how often or when do you think it's appropriate to reach for like a NIF, implement stuff in Rust or C or whatever?
I think so. So I mean, there are a couple scenarios that I can think of. So one is, well, the thing that they're going to do is complex, and it has already been solved, and, you know, it has been solved in Rust or in C, and you would rather just write the bindings and benefit from that. So like, for example, a lot of the stuff that we are doing in numerical Elixir is just bindings to existing library, because I'm not going to write a library that compiles tensor expressions to the GPU, right? Because it's probably hundreds of years of work collectively already there, and that makes total sense. The other case is also performance, when you really need the performance, and I think those would be the main reasons. Having the caveat that, I mean, there are a couple caveats, right? So one is, if you have mostly an Elixir project and you do introduce a dependency in C and Rust, probably means that fewer people are going to be able to change and maintain that, right? So there is this non-technical aspect, and that's always something to consider, right? Like, so in the open source projects, we are now having those C bindings, and the people who can contribute and maintain it is going to be, by definition, a subset of the Elixir developers, because it requires that background. And then there is the technical caveat, right? Which is, if you get something wrong in that code, now the whole VM goes down, and you lose some of the guarantees that comes with the virtual machine. But, you know, assuming you are aware of the trade-offs and you see that the benefits is there in terms of performance, or just, you know, we are going to do this binding, let's do it. And it's also worth saying that there is another option, which is, and I think this is what the nerves people, they use the majority of the time, is that they write ports. So they, in a nutshell, is that they would write small programs that are C programs, and they would interface with it with I/O, because the not having things break is extremely important for embedded devices, right? Because, well, if the thing breaks, it's going to reboot it and all this kind of stuff that the VM is meant to guarantee to you. So I think those are the things you should consider, and then you would balance them out. And if you think it makes sense, go for it.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Frank. I think we have time for one more. Matt Silbernagle.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Jose, for everything you've done and continue to do in the community. I was wondering, I think you kind of answered this question with the previous question, but I'll ask it again, and maybe you have something else to say about it. Is if you were starting Elixir again, fresh, knowing all the things you've already learned about building this amazing language, would there be anything you do different? Or
I don't know. Like, yeah, it's very tricky, right? Because, in a way, it's like if I had a time machine, even with the knowledge today, would I go back and change anything? And the answer is like, well, maybe I would change it and things would be worse, right? So, it's for me, it's very hard to answer that. I honestly don't know.
fair enough. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you, everybody. Unfortunately, we run out of time. Thank you again so much, Jose, for having this Ask Me Anything, and everyone for coming and listening and asking questions. It's been wonderful.